this would not have been suitable country for magpies. It would have been too thick. If you go into your Hawkesbury sandstone country, you might see a magpie walking along a track. You won't see one in that intact sandstone country. So this is getting back to the point I'm making, that we are creating urban ecosystems, and a lot of the birds that are using them, they weren't necessarily right here. They were in this landscape, but they have found new habitats and learnt to use them very well, because in these fertile lawns, I would suggest to you that the number of lawn grubs and earthworms that the magpies will jab with those really hard beaks would be much higher than they'd get in most natural environments. Cayley's one observation I could find that refers to the closest to here is he says that currawongs sometimes come into the trees about Government House, so very close to Government House. So currawongs, which you can, I heard one about half an hour ago when Jonathan's talking. They're right, flying around. I don't know what they're doing, flying around in these concrete canyons. They're right down Pitt Street. You can hear currawongs. I don't know what they're up to. But you can see their handiwork, because if you look up on some of the old sandstone buildings, you can see fig trees sprouting out of crevices. Currawongs like figs. There's no way a fig seed can blow off a fig tree here and end up on a sandstone building a few blocks away, but those currawongs are landing up there. And so there's a whole ecosystem. And I mean, if people don't remove the fig trees and they start fruiting, the currawongs are creating a food resource for themselves up on these old Sydney buildings. I mean, it's a fantastic system going on. Now, it's tempting to think that the currawongs now and the currawongs that Cayley talks about means that we've had 200 years of currawongs right here in the middle of the city. But we know that's not true. We've got a lot of bird observations made over the years. There was a bird book written, one in 1958 and another in 1991, and they talk about a lack of currawongs in the city, but currawongs in outer areas, then currawongs increasing. So they've come back. They would have been shot quite heavily. They were probably eaten. They would certainly have been persecuted as orchard pests. We've gone through a period in human history where our cities, if you look at really old black and white photos of capital cities, they often look very bare, open, extensive farmland. There would not have been many birds in those settings. We had the regreening of the cities, the end of shooting as a recreational pastime by city people, and birds being welcomed back into our cities. And so it's a renewal, a re-emergence of an urban ecosystem. Some of the vegetation in these gardens is actually from first settlement. So we've actually got this continuity of hundreds of years with some of the plants. So there are old she oaks, which are, I can't remember where they are, it's years since I've looked at them, but there's a grove of she oaks in the Botanic Gardens here that are believed to be regrowth from original trees. So they were cut down, but they resprouted, and trees that can resprout can basically go on forever. You can find little patches of flax lilies that are regarded as native survivors. And there's one old forest red gum near Lions Gate Head that I've looked at and thought that is an old growth tree. That predates European settlement in Australia. That I believe is the oldest living thing in inner Sydney. And I was looking at that tree and a wood duck flew out of a hole in it. Now, to me, that was an amazing experience. I mean, this is Sydney's oldest real estate, and it's still got relevance. Now, a wood duck is like the magpie bird that's benefiting from lawns. It grazes grass, really appreciates the high quality. I mean, there'd be really high nutritional value in this grass compared with a lot of native plants. It was not here 200 years ago. It may well have been here. If you go back to the last glacial maximum 18,000 years ago, it is more of an inland bird. So when Sydney was drier in the last ice age, some of the inland birds would have been here, but crested pigeons that you'll see around here, galahs, we know these birds weren't here, they've moved in. And this is all part of the new urban ecosystems that are developing in our cities. The ibis are part of that. There may have been probably a few ibis in the coastal mudflats, but certainly if you go back 200 years, there's no way there were ibis wandering around here. We're going for time. So I find that a really exciting thing. With the with the parrots I was talking about before, what I forgot to mention before is that, I mean, the number of parrots that Kaylee was talking about, king parrots, eastern rosellas, and crimson rosellas, sulphur-crested cockatoos, it's actually quite a lot of parrots. And Australia really is a land of parrots. And I talk about this in my bird book, I have a chapter on it. And I make this point that the average Australian suburb has got more parrot species than most tropical countries. So if you look at New South Wales, it's got 33 species of parrot. That's almost as rich in parrots as all of Africa and mainland Asia combined. So in all of Africa, there are only 22 parrot species. That's compared with 33 in New South Wales. And I've done long bird watching trips in Africa, and you can easily go a week and not see a parrot. And when you do see them, they're mainly brown-headed parrots. They're not particularly common. You've got to really hunt around for them. And so it really is spectacular, the extent to which we are a land of parrots. And we now have the DNA evidence to indicate that parrots spread out of Australia, that it was Australia that gave the world its parrots. And that, as I mentioned at the beginning, that same DNA evidence, plus also the fossil evidence, is telling us that Australia gave the world its songbirds. It's a really, really amazing story. And I really appreciate Jonathan saying that, he's mentioning this to people on community, uncles and aunties. It's like, of course, we always knew that it's, it's great because, of course, when you had science in the 19th century, the assumption was always that the Northern Hemisphere was superior, everything came out of the North. Charles Darwin actually said that in The Origin of Species. I mean, I'm not someone who would want to put Darwin down. He really was a very innovative thinker, very careful researcher. And what he said was common sense. He said that you've got so much land mass in the Northern Hemisphere that evolution has been able to advance to a higher degree through this increased level of competition. And so, because he was noticing that weeds from England would do very well in Australia, Africa, South America. So he was thinking that northern things were superior. And that when the first evidence was obtained that Australia had actually produced the world's songbirds, it was two Australian scientists, one of them, the Australian Museum here, Dick Shoddy and, mind blank, never mind. But yeah, no one believed them. It was hard for them to get their journal article published. But I think, that's part of the fabric of, I was really impressed that Jonathan, it's like storytelling, fire as a theme, and that for me, I'm not just a bird specialist, I'm interested in all of nature, but birds are a really powerful theme to sort of knit together stories about Australia, about sort of pride, ecological strength, the relationship between people and birds. I think the bird-human relationship in nature, it's very, very strong because of the number of people who feed birds, who appreciate birds. And our mammals aren't as obvious as those in Africa, but that we do love our birds and get a lot of value from them. And governments aren't actually doing enough to protect them. There's a real tragedy there. And one of the problems I talk about is that because we have so many big, bold, in-your-face birds, you can think the birds are doing really well. Look at them. Heaps of birds in my garden. I can hear lots of loud birds, but there are a lot of losers as well as winners that are slipping away. But in terms of the urban ecosystem that I'm talking about, we don't actually know where it's going to end. So we know that powerful owls have moved right into the centre of Sydney, that when they were, I don't know if they're still visiting these parklands, but when they were at the flying fox camp here, they were certainly sometimes coming in to prey on flying foxes, but also eat ringtail possums. And peregrine falcons are using these city skyscrapers. You can find excellent YouTube footage of a peregrine eating a pigeon on a city office ledge. You can just Google peregrine falcon Sydney. It's just fantastic. I think that's really exciting. We don't know the end point. And it's not necessarily convenient. We say, oh, isn't it lovely? But people get annoyed by ibises and flying foxes. It's not actually about our comfort. It is about nature saying, well, we've got to live somewhere. We're going to live here. And we've got to fit in with that to some extent. But I think it's really exciting and challenging. Thank you for hearing me out. So, I'll just invite questions, as Jonathan did. Does anyone have a question?
Soft-crested cockatoos. I read some years ago that during the droughts of the early 80s, they more of them migrated towards the coast. and the population have increased since the early 80s. Is there any truth in that at all?
So the question is, did sulphur-crested cockatoos migrate towards the coast as a response to drought? I would question that. I think that's definitely true of a lot of birds. We know that's true of crested pigeons, galahs. It's happened with water birds. So as a general phenomenon, that's applied to a lot of birds. Kaylee talks about cockatoos being here all along. Whether it happened to cockatoos, I can't say yes or no. I haven't seen that in literature. I'd leave that as a question mark.
Jonathan mentioned a lot about fire. So how would the birds be affected by the fire management of the country that they were on? Did they sort of work with the Indigenous people in that regard?
Who's they?
The birds.
Oh,
Sorry.
oh, well, I mean, if you look at after a fire, that'll suit. So that's the time when magpies will come in, pipits will come in. So there are birds that'll use an area that's just been burnt. A lot of parrots will come in. You'll have seed pods will open, so Banksia cones will drop their seeds. Cockatoos will come in for that. So there'll be a group of birds that will benefit from that. And then as the plant structure changes, you'll get a different group of birds. So the whole idea of the habitat mosaic is the way to think about it. That there'll be some birds won't benefit from a fire at all. They'll have to move somewhere else.
Did you have one?
Can you tell us a little bit more about the amazing research with the Lyrebirds?
Yeah, so this new Lyrebird Research in Victoria, you've had the tragic Ash Wednesday fires, a lot of people dying, a lot of houses dying. Those fires sweep across the landscape. What they found is that lyrebirds, by scratching up the leaf litter, they remove a lot of the ground cover plants. And so they're actually creating fire breaks. I mean, they may not know that they're doing that, but that's what they are. And so you've now got scientific evidence saying that if you've got the lyrebirds in the landscape, the areas they scratch over. And I mean, these are real ecological engineers, real ecosystem engineers. They move around tons of soil. I mean, the silt is ending up in streams because of lyrebirds. It's serious, because they've been introduced to Tasmania, and that is not considered a good thing. They're actually listed as a threat to the World Heritage Area of Western Tasmania, all these big raking claws. But in Victoria, they're creating fire breaks, and so the comment's been made that foxes, by killing lyrebirds, are increasing the fire risk to people. So foxes are a fire risk, lyrebirds help reduce fire risk. So yeah, it's amazing research.
Question here.
Hi Tim, loved your talk, love your books. Out Western Sydney we get a lot of migratory birds from the Northern Hemisphere. Did that happen in this part of Sydney as well? And what did they like to eat? Terrestrial orchids, what was it they liked to eat?
Sorry,
What did they like to eat?
you're talking about lyrebirds?
No, I'm talking about migratory birds from Siberia, Japan, coming to Western Sydney into the wetlands.
Okay.
Did they come to this part of Sydney as well?
Well, certainly, yeah, to the coastal areas. So you have swifts, so they're feeding on aerial insects, fork-tailed swifts, spine-tails. Then you've got all of your wading birds, which are mainly feeding on mud flats. And so they're feeding on mollusks, worms, insects. Oh, Japanese snipe. I mean, these are great birds. They've got snipe nesting in Japan. They used to nest on the slopes of Mount Fuji. They're flying direct to Australia. And I talk about how we know that a lot of the small plants you can see around Sydney, they're also found in China and Japan. So one of the common raspberries that you can find in the forest around here, Rubus parvifolius, actually reappears in southern Japan and China. And I think the seeds have just come here on Japanese snipe. So there's this amazing connection between hemispheres. But yeah, I think most of what they were eating were coastal resources, the kind of invertebrates that you get in mud flats.
Maybe they're Australian snipe?
Look, there's so many issues with names. like there's a name, we've got the name New Holland Honeyeater. I mean, it's sort of really quaint, but I mean, it's so archaic. And, Nanking night hare. And what's Nanking? This is a fabric that used to be bought out of China that was Nanking, a certain colour, Nanking kestrel. Yeah, all these weird and wonderful names. Let's not go there. But they do breed in Japan.
I've noticed a disappearance of small birds like silver eyes from around Centennial Park over the past 20 to 30 years. What's going on?
I think it'd be mainly noisy miners. It could also be currawongs. So there is fairly well documented research around Sydney that people who put out meat in gardens attracting the predatory birds. Now, currawongs and magpies and butcherbirds, they're not very effective predators on silver eyes. I think they more frighten them away than feeding on them in large numbers, but they are birds that cause fear to silver eyes. But certainly noisy miners are definitely inimical to all those small birds. They just see them as a threat to their food resources. So we know that when I was talking about noisy miners in these very large social groups, I was talking about more than 20 birds bringing a food item to the nest. What's been noticed about the food items that they bring, that they're often very, very tiny. And so that by excluding small birds like silver eyes, whistlers, fantails, thornbills, weebills, it means there are all these little insects that those birds would be targeting are still there in the landscape, and they can go around and pluck all these tiny little insects. And if it was just one bird taking food to the nest, that might be an inefficient process. But because the food bringing is also part of social engagement, the small food item provisioning works quite well. But one of the byproducts of that is fewer silver eyes in these parks.
The interesting thing is, I come from New Zealand where I live, and the silver eyes in our garden, I've noticed in the last 20 to 30 years, they have also undiminished. And I was wondering why the silver eyes were diminishing. So it's not only happening here then.
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear that. Yeah, I mean, you can wonder about issues like disease and things. I mean, we don't have much research going on in those areas. So often, when an expert like myself gives an answer, it's sort of like the pat answer that is based on one person's research. And, sometimes in the future, new research comes out showing something quite different. So research is quite thin on the ground, whether there's something else going on. I mean, interesting thing about silver eyes is that New Zealand never had them until the 19th century. They moved over in big flocks, and the Maori were eating them.
I was going to ask again about, I remember as a kid, the ibis were just kind of, why have ibis come on the radar so recently, and I find them hard to fall in love with, unlike all those other birds, but they seem to be more prevalent now than ever.
Yeah.
What's that from?
I mean, they've learnt really, really well to exploit waste. So they are big, giant seagulls. I mean, there's no question that they're using garbage bins. I mean, I've interviewed people who talk about Taronga Park Zoo releasing birds, certain releases of tame birds that may have accelerated the process of tame ibis. But yeah, I mean, ecologically, it's not really clear to me. Like if you had to wind back in time and say, which birds are going to end up in our suburban parks begging food? It's really seagulls, or I should call them silver gulls to be technical, but hey, I don't like being technical, I'll call them seagulls, just like everybody else. So it's really seagulls and white ibis. Now, if you look at seagulls, the seashore is a place of opportunity. Dead things wash up. It's sort of the edge between land and sea. So for an opportunistic bird that's on the lookout for anything goes, I can understand how a bird that's honed in on the opportunism of dead things on beaches is going to end up in city parks. But why the white ibis? I really do find that mysterious, and it's one of the reasons why, for me, I never lose interest in nature. Like, you're always trying to explain what you see, and it's incredibly satisfying when you can come up with a really good explanation for something, and there it is, when you can write it, and there it's in a book. Incredibly satisfying. But then you sort of turn around, and there's all these other things. You think, why this? Why that? And on the one hand, they're really frustrating, but on the other hand, it's all these challenges to try and work out. And so I really don't have any idea apart from what I've said. I mean, I think it's interesting that, like, one of the reasons why you're saying it's hard to like white ibis, I mean, obviously, you know, we like koalas. They've got a face like a teddy bear. We like flat faces. We don't like really long, pokey faces, so that doesn't help. But, like, they've got sort of bald faces as well. And so it's like a vulture. And so that's sort of suggesting they are designed to eat dead, rotting things. But I don't know. I don't get it.